The tears streaming down Rebecca Blackburn's face glistened in the harsh Kansas sun as she stepped off the train at Hayes City Station in 1875. Her shoulders trembled beneath her travel-worn blue dress, once fine but now dusty from the long journey. The leather-bound valise clutched in her gloved hands contained everything she owned in the world, which wasn't much. She scanned the crowded platform with red-rimmed eyes, searching for the man who was to be her husband. Quincy Hayes watched the young woman from beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. He'd been expecting a mail-order bride, but not one who looked as though her heart had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. His weathered hands gripped the wooden post he'd been leaning against as he straightened his tall frame and approached her. "Miss Blackburn?" he asked, his deep voice gentle despite its natural gruffness. Rebecca startled, hastily wiping her tears with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "Mr. Hayes?" "Yes, I'm Rebecca Blackburn." Quincy noticed how she tried to compose herself, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her attempt to appear cheerful was painfully obvious. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said simply, his blue eyes meeting hers. Rebecca's carefully constructed facade crumbled at his words. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This isn't how I wanted to make my first impression." Quincy gently took her valise. "Let's get out of this sun. My wagon's just over yonder." The platform bustled with activity around them, cowboys loading supplies, families reuniting, businessmen rushing to meetings, but in that moment, they existed in their own quiet bubble of understanding. Quincy didn't press her for explanations as he led her to his wagon, a sturdy vehicle with a team of 2 chestnut horses waiting patiently in the heat. He helped her onto the wooden seat, noticing how light she was, how fragile she seemed despite her efforts to appear strong. Once settled beside her, he clicked his tongue and the horses began their steady pace away from the station. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from town," Quincy explained, his eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. "It's not much, but it's mine. Paid for it fair and square 3 years back." Rebecca nodded, her hands fidgeting with her handkerchief. "I appreciate you meeting me, Mr. Hayes, especially after." Her voice trailed off. "After what?" he asked, glancing at her. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "After my letter. I wasn't sure you'd still want me as your bride after I wrote explaining my circumstances." Quincy's brow furrowed in confusion. "Miss Blackburn, I never received any letter except the one accepting my proposal 3 months ago." Rebecca's face paled. "You didn't?" "But I sent it weeks ago, explaining everything." "Mail's unreliable out here," Quincy said. "Sometimes letters never arrive, especially with the spring flooding we had. The post rider had to find new routes." Rebecca's hands trembled as she stared at the vast Kansas plains stretching before them. Fields of prairie grass swayed in the warm breeze, punctuated by occasional clusters of cottonwood trees. "Perhaps it's better this way," she said quietly. "I can explain in person." "No rush," Quincy assured her. "Whatever brought those tears to your eyes, well, it's your story to tell when you're ready." Rebecca studied him from the corner of her eye. Quincy Hayes wasn't what she had expected. His advertisement had described him as a rancher of 32 years, seeking a bride to share his life. But the man beside her was more than the few sentences on paper. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face was tanned from years under the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often. His brown hair had streaks of gold, and his beard was neatly trimmed. His hands, holding the reins with confidence, bore the calluses of hard work. "Your letters mentioned you had a small cattle operation," Rebecca said, attempting to shift the conversation. "How many head do you run?" Quincy seemed surprised by her knowledge of ranching terms but answered readily. About 60 head of Herefords. Nothing like the big spreads further south, but they're good stock. Been building the herd slowly. And you manage it alone? She asked. Got a ranch hand, Pedro Vasquez, Mexican fella who's been with me since I bought the place. Good with horses, better with cattle. His wife Magdalena helps with cooking sometimes. He paused. I hope that's not a problem. Rebecca shook her head. Why would it be? Some folks from back east have notions about Mexicans. I judge people by their character, Mr. Hayes, not their heritage. A small smile tugged at Quincy's lips. Glad to hear it. They fell into silence as the wagon continued its steady pace. The town of Hayes City grew smaller behind them as they traveled through the rolling prairie. Rebecca observed everything with keen interest, the vast openness, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia, where she'd spent her life. There's something you should know, Quincy said finally. The preacher only comes through Hayes City once a month. He won't be back for another 2 weeks. Rebecca tensed. I see. I've arranged for you to stay with the Wilsons in town until then. Martha Wilson is a good woman, runs the millinery shop. Her husband's the town doctor. Relief flooded through Rebecca. That's very thoughtful of you. Quincy nodded. Wouldn't be proper otherwise. I want to do this right. The simple declaration touched Rebecca more than flowery words might have. This man she'd agreed to marry sight unseen was showing consideration for her comfort and reputation. I appreciate that, Mr. Hayes. Might as well call me Quincy, he said. Seems we should be on a first-name basis if we're planning to marry. Rebecca managed a genuine smile for the first time since arriving. Then, I'm Rebecca. The tension eased between them as they continued their journey. Rebecca began to notice the beauty of the landscape, the way the sunlight painted the prairie grass in shades of gold, the wildflowers dotting the roadside with splashes of purple and yellow, the occasional jackrabbit darting across their path. It's beautiful here, she said. Different from what I'm used to, but beautiful. Gets in your blood, Quincy agreed. First time I saw this land, I knew I'd never leave. There's something about the openness that speaks to a man's soul, or a woman's, Rebecca added softly. Quincy glanced at her with new interest. Yes, I reckon that's so. As they traveled, Quincy pointed out landmarks: a creek where he fished for catfish, a stand of trees where wild turkeys roosted, the distant silhouette of his neighbor's ranch house 5 miles away. Nearest neighbors the Thompsons. Good folks. Their daughter Emily teaches at the schoolhouse in town. Is there much society in Hayes City? Rebecca asked. Quincy chuckled. Not like what you're probably used to. We have socials at the church once a month, barn dances when the harvest is in, Christmas festivities. Town's growing since the railroad came through, but it's still frontier living. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. I didn't come west expecting opera houses and fancy balls. Why did you come west? Quincy asked, his voice gentle. Rebecca stared at her hands. To start again, she said simply. Quincy didn't press further, and Rebecca was grateful for his restraint. The wagon crested a small hill, and he pointed ahead. There's Hayes City proper. Not much to look at, but it serves our needs. Rebecca took in the sight of the frontier town. A main street lined with wooden buildings, some 2 stories tall, others simple single-story structures. A church steeple rose above the other rooftops. Horses were hitched outside what appeared to be a saloon, and women in calico dresses moved between shops carrying parcels. It looks alive, Rebecca said. Like a place where people are building something. Quincy seemed pleased by her observation. That's exactly right. 5 years ago, it was hardly more than a trading post. Now we've got a school, a bank, 2 general stores, and even talk of a proper hotel being built next year. The wagon rolled into town, and Rebecca became aware of curious glances from townspeople. A woman sweeping the boardwalk outside a shop waved to Quincy, who tipped his hat in return. "Word travels fast," he said. "Everyone knows I sent for a bride." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "I suppose I'm a subject of interest." "For a while," Quincy agreed, "until someone else provides new gossip, probably the day after tomorrow." His tone was light, teasing, and Rebecca found herself smiling again. They stopped outside a neat two-story home with a small sign reading Dr. Wilson beside the door. A plump woman with graying hair stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Quincy Hayes, right on time," she called. "And this must be your Miss Blackburn." Quincy helped Rebecca down from the wagon. "Rebecca, this is Martha Wilson." "Martha, Miss Rebecca Blackburn from Philadelphia." Martha enveloped Rebecca in a warm embrace that smelled of cinnamon and clean linen. "Welcome to Hayes City, dear. We're so pleased to have you." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Wilson," Rebecca said. "None of that Mrs. Wilson business. I'm Martha to everyone except the children at Sunday school." She turned to Quincy. "Will you stay for supper? George should be home soon." Quincy shook his head. "Need to get back to the ranch before dark. Pedro's managing, but we've got a heifer about to calve." "Another time, then," Martha said cheerfully. She took Rebecca's valise from Quincy. "I'll just take this up to your room, dear. Give you two a moment to say goodbye." When Martha disappeared into the house, Rebecca turned to Quincy, suddenly uncertain. "Thank you for arranging this. It's very kind. Least I could do." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I'll come into town on Saturday. Thought I might show you around, maybe have dinner at the hotel restaurant if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Rebecca said. Quincy nodded, relief evident on his face. "Good, that's good." He cleared his throat. "Rebecca, whatever brought you here in tears, it doesn't change anything about our arrangement. But if you want to back out, I'll understand." Rebecca was touched by his offer. "I don't want to back out, but you deserve to know the truth before we proceed. On Saturday, I'll explain everything." "Saturday it is." Quincy hesitated, then gently touched her hand. "Rest well, Rebecca." "Goodbye, Quincy." She watched as he climbed back into his wagon and turned the horses toward home. As the wagon grew smaller in the distance, Rebecca felt something she hadn't expected, a flicker of hope. Martha reappeared beside her. "He's a good man, that Quincy Hayes." "He seems to be," Rebecca agreed. "Come inside, dear. You look exhausted, and I've got fresh bread and stew waiting. Tomorrow's soon enough to face the curious townsfolk." Rebecca followed Martha inside, grateful for the older woman's kindness. The house was modestly furnished but comfortable, with braided rugs on polished wooden floors and cheerful curtains at the windows. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Martha explained. Bathrooms at the end of the hall were fortunate to have indoor plumbing, thanks to George's insistence on modern conveniences. Rebecca's surprise must have shown on her face, for Martha laughed. "We're not completely uncivilized out here, though I suspect Quincy's ranch still relies on an outhouse and pump." "I didn't expect indoor plumbing," Rebecca admitted. "It's a pleasant surprise." "Hayes City is growing," Martha said proudly. "The railroad brought progress." "Now, let me show you to your room so you can freshen up before supper." The guest room was small but charming, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a small writing desk beneath the window that overlooked the main street. "It's lovely," Rebecca said. Martha patted her arm. "Take your time, dear. Supper won't be for another hour. George is always hungry when he gets home from his rounds." Left alone, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed. The tears she'd been holding back threatened to spill over again. She fumbled in her pocket for the letter that had arrived just before her departure from Philadelphia, the letter that had nearly broken her resolve to come west. The paper was worn from multiple readings, the ink smudged in places from her tears. She didn't need to unfold it to remember its contents. Richard Ellington, the man who had broken her heart and ruined her reputation in Philadelphia, informing her that he was coming west to find her, that he wouldn't allow her to escape him so easily. Rebecca shuddered. She'd hoped her letter to Quincy explaining everything would have reached him before her arrival. Now she would have to tell him face to face about the scandal, about the threats, about why she had boarded that train in tears. She tucked the letter away again and moved to the washstand, pouring water into the bowl to wash her face. The cool water felt good against her heated skin. In the small mirror hanging above the stand, she hardly recognized herself. The vibrant, optimistic young woman she'd once been seemed gone, replaced by someone with shadows in her eyes and tension in her jaw. "You're safe now," she whispered to her reflection. "He doesn't know exactly where you are," but the reassurance rang hollow. Richard had connections and resources. If he was determined to find her, Hayes City might not be far enough. A knock at the door startled her. "Rebecca, George is home and eager to meet you," Martha called. "I'll be right down," Rebecca answered, quickly drying her face and smoothing her travel-wrinkled dress as best she could. "Doctor." George Wilson proved to be a jovial man with a bushy white beard and twinkling eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He greeted Rebecca with genuine warmth. "So you're the brave young lady who's agreed to take on Quincy Hayes," he said, shaking her hand. "Good man, Quincy. Stubborn as a mule and twice as hardworking." "George," Martha scolded gently, "let the poor girl sit down before you start telling tales." Dinner was simple but delicious beef stew with dumplings, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and apple pie for dessert. Rebecca found herself relaxing in the Wilsons' company as they chatted about the town and its inhabitants. "How long have you lived in Hayes City?" she asked as Martha poured coffee. "Going on 12 years now," George answered. "Came out after the war. Thought the frontier needed doctors more than Philadelphia did." "You're from Philadelphia, too?" Rebecca asked in surprise. George nodded. "Born and raised, trained at Jefferson Medical College." "What a coincidence," Rebecca murmured. "Or Providence," Martha suggested with a smile. "Perhaps you were meant to find familiar faces to ease your transition." After dinner, Rebecca helped Martha with the dishes despite the older woman's protests. "I want to earn my keep," Rebecca insisted. "I'm not used to being idle." "Quincy mentioned you were a teacher back east," Martha said as they worked. Rebecca nodded. "At a girls' school. I taught literature and French." "We could use someone with your education at our school," Martha mused. "Emily Thompson does her best, but she's teaching all 8 grades by herself." "I don't know how long I'll be in town," Rebecca reminded her. "Once Quincy and I are married, I'll be living at his ranch." Martha smiled knowingly. "True, but Quincy comes into town regularly, and winter months are quiet on the ranch, something to consider." The idea of teaching again brought a genuine smile to Rebecca's face. "Perhaps I will." Later, as Rebecca prepared for bed, she found herself gazing out the window at the stars scattered across the Kansas sky. They seemed brighter, closer here than they had in Philadelphia. Her mind turned to Quincy Hayes, his kindness when he saw her tears, his consideration in arranging her accommodation in town, the gentle touch of his hand on hers. He wasn't what she had expected from their exchange of letters. He was better. But would he still want to marry her once he knew the truth? With that troubling thought, Rebecca climbed into bed, the exhaustion of her journey finally overtaking her as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of introductions as Martha proudly showed Rebecca around Hayes City. The townspeople were generally welcoming, though Rebecca felt the weight of their curious stares. Word had spread quickly about Quincy Hayes's mail-order bride, and everyone seemed eager to form their own impressions. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Jenkins, barely concealed her disappointment that Rebecca wasn't the fragile Eastern flower she had expected. "You've got capable hands," she observed as Rebecca examined a bolt of calico. "Not what I pictured for Quincy Hayes's bride." "I believe capable hands are an asset on a ranch," Rebecca replied mildly. Mrs. Jenkins sniffed. "I suppose that's true enough." At the millinery shop that Martha owned, Rebecca met several of the town's women who stopped by ostensibly to look at hats, but really to assess the newcomer. Some were openly friendly, like Emily Thompson, the school teacher, who immediately invited Rebecca to visit her classroom. "The children would love to hear about Philadelphia," Emily said enthusiastically. "Most of them have never been east of the Missouri River." Others were more reserved, watching Rebecca with careful eyes as they asked pointed questions about her background and intentions. "Mail-order brides often have complicated pasts," one woman remarked with false sweetness. "What brought you all the way to Kansas, Miss Blackburn?" Before Rebecca could formulate a response that wasn't a lie but didn't reveal too much, Martha intervened. "What brings any of us to Kansas, Harriet? Opportunity and fresh starts. Now, did you come to gossip or to look at that blue bonnet you've been eyeing for weeks?" By Saturday morning, Rebecca had met most of the town's prominent citizens and formed her own impressions. Hayes City was like many frontier towns, a mix of hardworking people trying to build a community, opportunists looking to profit from growth, and a few lost souls seeking escape or redemption. As she dressed for her outing with Quincy, Rebecca felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. She chose her best dress, a sage green cotton with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Martha had helped her press it the night before, and the older woman had insisted on lending Rebecca a pretty cameo brooch to adorn the high neckline. "There," Martha said approvingly as Rebecca pinned up her chestnut hair. "You look lovely, dear. Quincy won't know what hit him." Rebecca smiled weakly. "I hope he still feels that way after our conversation." Martha patted her hand. "Whatever's troubling you, I doubt it's as bad as you think. Quincy Hayes isn't a man to judge hastily." "I pray you're right," Rebecca said softly. Quincy arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, looking distinctly uncomfortable in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a string tie. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with pomade. When Rebecca descended the stairs, his eyes widened and he removed his hat hastily. "Miss Blackburn, Rebecca," he corrected himself. "You look mighty fine this morning." "Thank you, Quincy. You look very handsome yourself." A flush crept up his neck and he cleared his throat. "Thought we might start with a tour of the town, then have dinner at the hotel." "That sounds wonderful," Rebecca agreed. They bid farewell to Martha, who waved them off with a knowing smile. As they walked side by side down the main street, Rebecca was acutely aware of the glances and whispers from townsfolk. "Feels like we're on display," she murmured. Quincy grimaced. "Nothing much happens in Hayes City. We're the most interesting thing since the Wentworth boy brought home a baby coyote thinking it was a puppy." Rebecca laughed despite her nervousness. "What happened to the coyote?" "His mama made him return it to where he found it. Poor boy cried for a week." Quincy's eyes crinkled when he smiled. "I got him a real puppy after that, one of my best herding dog's pups." "That was kind of you." Quincy shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "The boy needed a dog. Every boy does." Their tour took them past the schoolhouse, the bank, the sheriff's office, and finally to a small park on the edge of town where a gazebo stood surrounded by young saplings. Town council planted those trees last Arbor Day, Quincy explained. Won't provide much shade for years, but it's a start. It's wonderful that the town is thinking toward the future, Rebecca said. They sat on a bench in the gazebo, relatively private from curious eyes. A breeze rustled through the prairie grass beyond the park's boundaries, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed earth. Quincy turned to face her, his expression serious. "Rebecca, before we go any further, I think it's time for that talk you mentioned." Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, I suppose it is." She took a deep breath. "Quincy, when I answered your advertisement, I was completely honest about who I am. I am a teacher from Philadelphia. I am 24 years old. I have no family. My parents died of influenza 5 years ago." "I never doubted those facts," Quincy assured her. "What I didn't tell you, what I tried to explain in the letter that never arrived, is why I was so eager to leave Philadelphia." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I was engaged to be married to Richard Ellington, the son of my father's business partner. After my parents died, the Ellingtons took me in, and eventually Richard and I became betrothed." Quincy listened silently, his expression unreadable. "I discovered that Richard was not the man I thought him to be," Rebecca continued, her voice growing strained. "He had other women. When I confronted him, he became angry, threatening." She swallowed hard. "One night, after a particularly heated argument, he struck me." Quincy's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent. "I broke our engagement immediately," Rebecca said, "but Richard spread rumors that I had been improper with another man. In Philadelphia society, such accusations are devastating, especially against a woman without family to defend her." "That's why you answered my advertisement," Quincy said quietly. Rebecca nodded. "I lost my teaching position. Former friends turned their backs on me. I had little money saved and nowhere to go." She paused. "Then I received a letter from Richard the day before I left. He claims he's coming west to find me." Quincy's jaw tightened. "Is that why you were crying when you arrived?" "Yes," Rebecca admitted. "I was afraid, still am afraid, that he'll find me and cause trouble here too. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to call off our arrangement. I've brought my problems to your doorstep." Quincy was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "Rebecca, I appreciate your honesty. Can't have been easy to tell me all this." He turned to face her. "But I don't scare easily, and I don't put much stock in rumors. As for this Richard fella, well, any man who'd strike a woman and then try to ruin her reputation isn't much of a man at all." Relief washed over Rebecca like a wave. "You're not angry?" "Not with you," Quincy said firmly. "With him, surely, but you didn't do anything wrong from what I can tell." "You still want to marry me?" Rebecca asked, hardly daring to hope. "More than ever," Quincy said simply. "You're brave and honest, Rebecca. Those are qualities I value. The question is, do you still want to marry me? You agreed based on letters and necessity. Now that you've met me, if you've changed your mind, I'll understand." Rebecca studied him, this kind, straightforward man who had offered her a fresh start without judgment. "I haven't changed my mind, Quincy. If anything, meeting you has confirmed that I made the right decision." The tension visibly left Quincy's shoulders. "Good, that's real good." He stood, offering her his hand. "Now, how about that dinner I promised you? The hotel restaurant makes a fine roast beef." Rebecca placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his calloused palm. "Lead the way." The Hotel Hayes dining room was the finest establishment in town, with white tablecloths and actual napkins, luxuries that impressed Rebecca more than Quincy seemed to realize. They were seated at a corner table by a window overlooking the main street. Several diners glanced their way with undisguised interest. "Ignore them," Quincy advised as he held Rebecca's chair. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." Their meal was pleasant, the food surprisingly good for a frontier establishment. As they ate, their conversation turned to more mundane matters: Quincy's ranch, Rebecca's teaching experience, their shared love of reading. "Not many books at the ranch," Quincy admitted. "Got a Bible, a farming almanac, and a couple of novels my mother gave me years back. Been meaning to add to the collection." "I brought a few of my favorites," Rebecca said. "I couldn't bear to leave them behind. Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Walt Whitman." "Never read Whitman," Quincy said. "Is he good?" "He writes about America, the real America. The prairies, the cities, the people." "I think you'd like him," Quincy smiled. "Maybe you could read some to me sometime." The simple domestic image his words conjured, evenings by lamplight, sharing books together, warmed Rebecca's heart. "I'd like that very much." After dinner, they strolled back toward the Wilsons' home. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as they walked side by side, not touching but close enough that Rebecca could feel Quincy's presence like a protective shield. "I should head back to the ranch soon," Quincy said reluctantly as they neared the Wilsons' house. "Got chores that need doing before dark." "Of course," Rebecca said. "Thank you for today, for everything." Quincy hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Rebecca, I meant what I said earlier. This Richard fella, if he shows up, he'll have me to deal with." "I pray it won't come to that," Rebecca said. "As do I," Quincy agreed. "But know that you're not alone anymore." He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "I'll come by tomorrow after church. Preacher Jenkins wants to meet you, talk about the ceremony in 2 weeks." Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy. "I look forward to it." As Quincy walked away toward the livery where he'd left his wagon, Rebecca watched him go with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. Relief that he knew the truth and hadn't rejected her, gratitude for his protection, and something else aflutter in her chest when he smiled, a warmth when he took her hand. Inside, Martha was waiting with barely contained curiosity. "Well, how was your day?" Rebecca smiled. "It was lovely. Quincy was a perfect gentleman." "And did you have your talk?" Martha asked gently. "Yes." "He was very understanding." Martha nodded, unsurprised. "I told you he would be. Quincy Hayes is a good man with a steady heart." "Yes," Rebecca agreed softly. "I believe he is." That night, as Rebecca prepared for bed, she felt lighter than she had in months. For the first time since fleeing Philadelphia, she allowed herself to truly hope that her future might hold happiness after all. The next morning, Rebecca accompanied the Wilsons to the small white church at the edge of town. The simple wooden building was filled nearly to capacity with Hayes City residents in their Sunday best. Rebecca felt the weight of curious stares as she walked down the aisle beside Martha, but she held her head high. Quincy was already seated near the back. When he saw Rebecca, he stood, gesturing to the empty space beside him. Martha gave Rebecca a gentle push forward with a knowing smile. "Good morning," Quincy said as Rebecca settled beside him. He looked handsome in a dark suit that appeared rarely worn, his hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," Rebecca replied. "You clean up nicely." A flush crept up his neck and he tugged at his collar. "Don't wear this get-up often, feels like I'm being strangled." Rebecca bit back a smile. "You look very distinguished." Before Quincy could respond, the service began. Preacher Jenkins, a tall man with a sonorous voice that belied his thin frame, led the congregation in hymns and prayers before delivering a sermon on new beginnings that seemed pointedly relevant to Rebecca's situation. "The Lord offers us all fresh starts," he intoned. "Whether we're longtime residents of Hayes City or newcomers to our community." His gaze rested briefly on Rebecca. God's grace allows us to begin anew. After the service, congregants lingered to socialize. Quincy stayed close to Rebecca's side as a steady stream of townsfolk approached to introduce themselves. "Miss Blackburn, welcome to Hayes City," said a portly man with an impressive mustache. "Stanley Turner, mayor of our fine town. We're delighted to have an educated woman join our community." "Thank you, Mayor Turner," Rebecca replied politely. "I understand you were a teacher back east," he continued. "We're always looking for qualified educators. Our school term begins again in September." Before Rebecca could respond, Preacher Jenkins approached. "Ah, Miss Blackburn. I've been looking forward to meeting you. And Quincy, good to see you in church 2 Sundays in a row must be a record." Quincy looked sheepish. "Had reason to come to town today, preacher." "Indeed you did," Jenkins agreed with a smile. "Quincy tells me you two wish to be married when I return in 2 weeks. Perhaps we could discuss the details after you've finished greeting everyone." "Of course," Rebecca agreed. It took nearly an hour before the crowd thinned enough for Rebecca and Quincy to speak privately with Preacher Jenkins. They followed him to his small office attached to the church. "Now then," Jenkins said, settling behind his desk. "Quincy has explained that you two became acquainted through correspondence. While such arrangements are common out here, I do have a responsibility to ensure that both parties enter into matrimony with clear understanding and free consent." "We understand," Quincy said, glancing at Rebecca. "Miss Blackburn, do you enter into this marriage of your own free will?" Jenkins asked directly. "I do," Rebecca answered firmly. "And are you aware of what will be expected of you as a rancher's wife? The work is hard, the comforts few compared to Eastern living." Rebecca smiled. "Preacher Jenkins, I may be from Philadelphia, but I'm not afraid of hard work. My father believed in practical education for women as well as men. I can cook, sew, tend a garden, and keep accounts. I'm willing to learn whatever else is needed." Jenkins looked pleased. A refreshing attitude. Too many come west with romantic notions that quickly sour when faced with reality. He turned to Quincy. "And you, Quincy, are you prepared to be a husband in all respects, to provide, protect, and cherish this woman as God commands?" "Yes, sir," Quincy said solemnly. "Have been preparing my place for a wife these past 6 months. Got the house in better shape, added a room, put in proper windows with glass. Very good." Jenkins made some notes in a ledger. "I'll return on Saturday, August 14th. We can hold the ceremony after the morning service if that suits you both." "It does," Quincy confirmed, looking to Rebecca for agreement. She nodded. "Excellent. I'll need to see you both before then for premarital counseling, perhaps Friday afternoon." After finalizing the details, they thanked Preacher Jenkins and stepped back into the churchyard. Most of the congregation had dispersed, leaving them relatively alone in the dappled shade of the church's single oak tree. "You hungry?" Quincy asked. "Martha packed us a picnic lunch. Thought we might ride out to the ranch, let you see the place before you commit to living there." Rebecca's heart quickened. "I'd like that very much." Quincy's wagon was hitched outside the church. In the back was a wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth. He helped Rebecca onto the seat before climbing up beside her. "It's about an hour's ride," he reminded her. "Road gets a bit rough in places." "I'm looking forward to seeing your land," Rebecca said honestly. As they drove away from town, Rebecca felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced before. The vast Kansas sky stretched overhead, the prairie spread out around them in undulating waves of grass and wildflowers. After the confines of Philadelphia, the openness was exhilarating. "It's so beautiful," she breathed. Quincy glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Most folks from back east find it too empty at first. Takes time to appreciate the vastness." No, I see it immediately, Rebecca insisted. There's something honest about it. No pretensions, nothing hidden, just earth and sky meeting at the horizon. Quincy looked at her with new appreciation. That's it exactly. Never heard it put into words before. They fell into comfortable silence as the wagon rolled along the rutted trail. Occasionally, Quincy would point out features of interest, a hawk circling overhead, a distant line of trees marking a creek, the first glimpse of his land as they crested a gentle rise. Everything you can see from here to that far ridge is mine, he said with quiet pride. 160 acres under the Homestead Act, plus another 80 I purchased outright. Rebecca took in the rolling grassland, the scattered cattle grazing in the distance, and the small cluster of buildings that made up the ranch headquarters. It's wonderful, Quincy, she said sincerely. As they drew closer, Rebecca could make out the details: a modest but solid-looking frame house painted white, a large red barn, several outbuildings, and a corral with horses. A vegetable garden was visible beside the house, surrounded by a fence to keep animals out. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, presumably Pedro, the ranch hand Quincy had mentioned. He waved in greeting. "Señor Quincy, did not expect you back so early," he called as they pulled up in front of the house. "Wanted to show Miss Blackburn the place," Quincy explained, helping Rebecca down from the wagon. "Rebecca, this is Pedro Vasquez, best ranch hand in Kansas." Pedro removed his hat, revealing salt and pepper hair. His weathered face split into a wide smile. "The famous Miss Blackburn. My Magdalena has been very curious about you. She is inside, preparing dinner." As if on cue, a plump, dark-haired woman appeared in the doorway of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Quincy, you bring your bride to visit. Excellent." She hurried down the steps to greet them. "I am Magdalena. Welcome to Rancho Hayes, señorita." Rebecca was enveloped in a warm embrace that smelled of chili peppers and fresh bread. "Thank you for your welcome," Rebecca said when she was released. "I hope our visit doesn't disrupt your Sunday." Magdalena waved away her concern. "No, no. It's good you come. You must see the house before you marry this one." She jerked her thumb at Quincy with affectionate teasing. Men know nothing of what makes a home comfortable for a woman. Quincy looked mildly embarrassed. "Been trying my best, Maggie." Yes, you build new bedroom, very nice. But did you think of shelves for her books, a proper sitting area?" "No." Magdalena turned to Rebecca with a conspiratorial smile. "Men think of walls and roof, women think of home." Rebecca couldn't help laughing at Quincy's chagrined expression. "I'm sure whatever Quincy has prepared will be wonderful." "You see for yourself," Magdalena declared. "I show you the house while the men take care of the horses." While Quincy and Pedro led the team to the barn, Magdalena guided Rebecca into the house. The main floor consisted of a good-sized kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a dining area, and a small sitting room with two comfortable-looking chairs flanking a stone fireplace. Everything was clean and well-maintained, if somewhat sparse in decoration. "Quincy is good man, but bachelor too long," Magdalena explained as she showed Rebecca around. "House needs woman's touch." Upstairs were two bedrooms, the master bedroom that Quincy occupied, and the new room he had added for Rebecca until they were married. "After wedding, you share big room, of course," Magdalena said matter-of-factly. "New room make good nursery later, yes." Rebecca blushed at the frank mention of children, but Magdalena merely laughed. "No need for embarrassment, señorita. Is natural way of things. Quincy will make good father. He is kind, patient man." "You've worked for him a long time?" Rebecca asked as they returned downstairs. 5 years. When Pedro and I came north from Mexico, many ranchers would not hire Mexicans. Quincy not only hired Pedro but built small house for us. She pointed through the window to a neat cabin visible behind the barn. Pedro good with horses, best wrangler in county. I help with cooking, cleaning when Quincy busy with ranch. It sounds like a good arrangement. It is. Magdalena hesitated, then added, Quincy is happy you come. Many months he talk of finding wife. Says ranch too quiet, needs family to be complete. Before Rebecca could respond, the men entered the house, bringing the picnic basket with them. Thought we'd eat out back under the cottonwood, Quincy suggested. Show Rebecca the view of the creek. They settled in the shade of a massive cottonwood tree behind the house. From this vantage point, Rebecca could see a small creek winding through the property about a quarter-mile away, its banks lined with willows and wild plum trees. Martha had packed a generous lunch: fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and apple pie. As they ate, Pedro and Magdalena shared stories of ranch life that had Rebecca alternately laughing and wide-eyed with surprise. The winter of '72 was brutal, Pedro recalled. Snow so deep the cattle were trapped. Quincy and I rode out every day to bring feed, sometimes digging through drifts taller than a horse. Lost only 3 head that winter, Quincy said. Neighbors lost dozens. Because you are a stubborn man who will not let nature win, Magdalena teased. After lunch, Pedro and Magdalena excused themselves to their cabin, leaving Rebecca and Quincy alone. He offered to show her the rest of the ranch, and they walked side by side through the tall grass toward the creek. What do you think? Quincy asked, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Of the place, I mean. It's lovely, Rebecca said honestly. I can see how much work you've put into it. It's not fancy, Quincy acknowledged. Not like what you're probably used to in Philadelphia. Rebecca stopped walking and turned to face him. Quincy, I'm not comparing your ranch to Philadelphia. They're different worlds. What matters to me is that this feels like somewhere I could belong. And does it? He asked quietly. Feel like you could belong here? Rebecca looked around at the sun-dappled prairie, the distant cattle, the solid house on the hill behind them. Yes, she said, it does. Relief washed over Quincy's features. Good, that's real good. They continued their walk to the creek. The water was clear and shallow, gurgling over smooth stones. Dragonflies skimmed across the surface, and the willow branches swayed gently in the breeze. This is my favorite spot on the property, Quincy admitted. Come here sometimes in the evening just to listen to the water and watch the sunset. Rebecca could easily imagine him here, hat in hands, his face softened in the fading light as he took a rare moment of peace after a long day's work. I can see why, she said. It's peaceful. They sat on a fallen log near the bank, watching the water flow past. After a comfortable silence, Quincy spoke. Rebecca, there's something I should tell you about why I advertised for a bride. Rebecca turned to him, curious. I assumed it was because there aren't many unmarried women in Kansas. That's part of it, Quincy acknowledged. But there's more. He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread. I was engaged once before, about 5 years ago. Her name was Caroline. Rebecca waited silently, sensing there was more to the story. She came west with her family during the land rush. Her father homesteaded nearby. We courted proper, got engaged. Quincy's voice grew strained. Winter came early that year. Blizzard hit while her father was in town for supplies. He tried to make it home but got lost in the storm. Oh no, Rebecca whispered. Found him 2 days later frozen. Caroline and her mother couldn't manage the homestead alone. They sold up and moved back east. Quincy's jaw tightened. Caroline asked me to go with them back to Ohio. But this land, it's part of me now, couldn't leave it. So she left without you, Rebecca said softly. Quincy nodded. Don't blame her. City girl at heart she was, never truly settled here. He looked at Rebecca directly. That's why I was specific in my advertisement. Wanted someone who understood what they were coming to, no false expectations. Rebecca placed her hand on his arm. Thank you for telling me. And Quincy, I understand what I'm agreeing to. I know life here won't be easy, but I'm ready for it. You sure about that? Because once we're married, there's no easy way back to Philadelphia. I don't want to go back, Rebecca said firmly. There's nothing for me there but painful memories. The sun was beginning its downward arc toward the horizon when they finally returned to the house. Quincy loaded the picnic basket back into the wagon and helped Rebecca up onto the seat. Need to get you back before dark, he said. Don't want to give the gossips more to talk about. As they drove away from the ranch, Rebecca took one last look at the place that would soon be her home. Despite the circumstances that had brought her to Kansas, despite the uncertainty and fear that had accompanied her journey, she felt a sense of rightness about where she had landed. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Martha insisted on helping Rebecca sew a new dress for the ceremony, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored cotton with lace trim that Martha had been saving for a special occasion. Every bride should feel beautiful on her wedding day, Martha declared as they worked on the dress together in the evenings. During the days, Rebecca explored Hayes City more thoroughly, gradually becoming familiar with its rhythm and residents. She visited Emily Thompson's schoolhouse and was immediately enchanted by the bright-eyed children eager to hear stories about the East. You have a natural gift with them, Emily observed after Rebecca had captivated the class with tales of Philadelphia's historic sites. Have you considered teaching here? As I mentioned, I'm overwhelmed with 8 grades by myself. Perhaps after I'm settled at the ranch, Rebecca said thoughtfully. Quincy comes to town regularly. I could perhaps teach a few days a week. That would be wonderful, Emily exclaimed. Even part-time help would be a blessing. Quincy came to town every few days, sometimes on ranch business, sometimes expressly to see Rebecca. They took walks together, shared meals, and gradually grew more comfortable in each other's company. Rebecca found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation, her heart quickening at the sight of his wagon coming down the main street. On the Wednesday before the wedding, Quincy arrived with a small wooden crate in his wagon. Got something for the house, he explained as he helped Rebecca up beside him. Thought you might want to see where it goes. During the now familiar drive to the ranch, Quincy seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. Rebecca didn't press him, content to enjoy the journey and the beautiful late summer day. At the ranch, Magdalena greeted them warmly before returning to her work in the garden. Quincy carried the crate into the house and set it down in the sitting room. Been thinking about what Maggie said, he explained, producing a hammer from his pocket. About the house needing a woman's touch. He pried open the crate to reveal a beautiful oak bookcase, its shelves empty and waiting. Ordered it from the furniture maker in Salina, Quincy said, watching Rebecca's face anxiously. For your books, thought it might make the place feel more like home for you. Rebecca's heart swelled with emotion. The thoughtfulness of the gift, the effort to make her feel welcome in his home touched her deeply. Quincy, it's perfect, she said, running her hand along the smooth wood. Thank you. There's something else, he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and handed it to Rebecca. This belonged to my mother. She gave it to me before she passed, said to give it to my bride someday. Rebecca opened the pouch to find a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. It's beautiful, she whispered. If you don't like it, we can get another. No, Rebecca interrupted. I love it. It's perfect, Quincy, truly. Relief washed over his features. Good, that's good. They spent the afternoon arranging the bookcase in the sitting room and discussing where other furniture might go once Rebecca moved in permanently. The easy domesticity of the conversation, the way they naturally considered each other's preferences, felt right in a way Rebecca hadn't expected. As they walked back to the wagon for the return trip to town, Quincy hesitated. "Rebecca, I know our arrangement started as practical for both of us, but I want you to know," he paused, seemingly struggling to find the right words. "I'm glad it's you, that's all." The simple declaration warmed Rebecca from within. "I'm glad it's you too, Quincy." The morning of August 14th dawned clear and bright. Rebecca woke early, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation fluttering in her stomach. Today she would become Mrs. Quincy Hayes, joining her life to a man she had known for barely a month. Yet somehow, it felt right. In their short acquaintance, Quincy had shown himself to be kind, honorable, and trustworthy qualities Rebecca valued far above the polished manners and social status that had once seemed important in Philadelphia. Martha bustled about, helping Rebecca dress and arranging her hair with small white flowers from the garden. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, her eyes suspiciously moist. "Quincy is a fortunate man, Dr. Wilson escorted Rebecca to the church, having graciously offered to stand in for her father. The small building was filled with townspeople, some friends, many simply curious to witness the marriage of Quincy Hayes to his mail-order bride. Quincy waited at the altar beside Preacher Jenkins, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in his Sunday best. When Rebecca entered on Dr. Wilson's arm, Quincy's expression transformed wonder, admiration, and something deeper that made Rebecca's heart skip a beat. The ceremony was simple and brief. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another until death parted them. When Quincy slipped his mother's ring onto Rebecca's finger, his hands were steady but his eyes betrayed his emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Jenkins declared. "Quincy, you may kiss your bride." Quincy hesitated, then leaned forward to place a gentle, almost reverent kiss on Rebecca's lips there first. Brief as it was, the kiss sent warmth spreading through Rebecca's body, and she found herself blushing as they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. A small reception followed at the Wilsons' home, with cake and punch for the well-wishers who came to congratulate the newlyweds. Rebecca found herself overwhelmed by the genuine warmth of the community's welcome, so different from the often superficial socializing she had known in Philadelphia. As the afternoon waned, Quincy approached her quietly. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Hayes?" The words sent a thrill through Rebecca. "Home. They're home." "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." They bid farewell to the Wilsons, Martha pressing a basket of food into their hands and embracing Rebecca tightly. "Be happy, dear," she whispered, "and remember I'm just a short ride away if you need a friend." The drive to the ranch was different this time, no return trip planned, no goodbyes at the end of the day. As they approached the house, Rebecca saw that the porch had been decorated with wildflowers, and a hand-painted sign hung from the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes." "Maggie's doing," Quincy explained with a smile. "Said every bride deserves a proper welcome." Inside, the house had been transformed. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, the table was set with the best dishes, and vases of wildflowers brightened every room. "She's been busy," Rebecca observed, touched by the effort. "Magdalena and Pedro are staying in town tonight," Quincy said, suddenly looking nervous again. "Thought we might want privacy on our first night as husband and wife." The implication hung in the air between them. Rebecca felt a blush rising to her cheeks but met Quincy's gaze steadily. "That was thoughtful of them," she said softly. Quincy cleared his throat. Are you hungry? Maggie left supper warming on the stove. The simple question broke the tension and Rebecca laughed. Starving, actually. I was too nervous to eat much at the reception. They shared their first meal as husband and wife at the kitchen table, talking easily about the wedding, the guests, the future. As dusk fell, Quincy lit the lamps, their golden glow casting warm shadows across the room. I'll get your bags upstairs, he said when they'd finished eating. He hesitated. Rebecca, I want you to know there's no rush. For anything, we can take time to know each other better. The consideration in his offer touched Rebecca deeply. This man, who had every right as her husband to expect a traditional wedding night, was instead offering her space and time. Thank you, Quincy, she said, but I think I'd like to begin our marriage as husband and wife in every way. Relief and desire mingled in Quincy's expression. I'd like that too, he said quietly. Later, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Rebecca lay in her husband's arms, her head resting on his chest. Their lovemaking had been tender and unhurried, Quincy's consideration for her inexperience evident in every touch. Are you all right? He murmured, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. More than all right, Rebecca assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest. I'm happy, Quincy, truly happy. His arms tightened around her. Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes. The following weeks were a period of adjustment as Rebecca settled into life as a rancher's wife. She learned the rhythm of the day's early mornings with Quincy rising before dawn, breakfast prepared as the sun peeked over the horizon, days filled with chores and tasks that never seemed to end. Magdalena proved an invaluable teacher, showing Rebecca how to manage the household efficiently, how to preserve vegetables from the garden for winter, how to make soap and candles when supplies ran low. You learn quick, Magdalena approved when Rebecca successfully baked her first loaf of bread in the temperamental oven. Not like some city women who come west and cry for their fancy things. Rebecca found satisfaction in the physical work, in going to bed tired but accomplished each night. And always, there was Quincy patient when she made mistakes, appreciative of her efforts and increasingly demonstrative in his affection. They established a routine of riding into Hayes City every other Sunday for church, often staying for dinner with the Wilsons afterward. On one such visit in late September, Emily Thompson approached Rebecca after the service. Have you given any more thought to teaching? She asked eagerly. School has been in session for 3 weeks, and I'm already overwhelmed. Rebecca glanced at Quincy, who had overheard the question. What do you think, Quincy? Would it be possible for me to help at the school a few days a week? Quincy considered the question seriously. Winter's coming. Ranch work slows some. I could bring you to town on Mondays and Wednesdays, pick you up in the evenings. Would that be enough help? Rebecca asked Emily. It would be wonderful, Emily exclaimed. You could take the younger children, teach them reading and arithmetic while I focus on the older students. And so it was arranged. Rebecca began teaching at the Hayes City School twice weekly, finding renewed purpose in helping the eager young minds of the frontier children. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, and the arrangement allowed Rebecca to maintain connections in town while still fulfilling her duties as Quincy's wife. October brought the cattle roundup, a busy time as Quincy and Pedro, along with hired hands from neighboring ranches, gathered the herd to select animals for market and prepare the others for winter. Rebecca found herself cooking for hungry men from dawn until dusk, learning to stretch provisions and create hearty meals that would sustain them through long days in the saddle. Never tasted stew this good on roundup before, one grizzled cowhand declared, helping himself to a second bowl. Hayes sure knew what he was doing when he sent for you, madam. Rebecca caught Quincy's eye across the crowded kitchen, a private smile passing between them. In those moments, she knew they were building something real together, something that had grown beyond their practical arrangement into genuine partnership and deepening love. As the days grew shorter and the first frost silvered the prairie grass, Rebecca began to suspect a new development in their lives. Her monthly courses, regular as clockwork since she was 16, failed to appear. After 2 weeks of waiting, she confided her suspicions to Magdalena. The older woman's face split into a wide smile. "A baby! This is wonderful news. Have you told Quincy?" "Not yet," Rebecca admitted. "I wanted to be sure." "Trust your body, Senora, it knows." Magdalena patted Rebecca's still flat stomach. "You tell him tonight, he will be very happy." That evening, after supper, Rebecca and Quincy sat before the fireplace in the sitting room. Outside, the wind moaned across the prairie, harbinger of the winter to come, but inside their home was warm and cozy. "Quincy," Rebecca began, her heart fluttering with nervous excitement, "I have something to tell you." He set aside the harness he had been repairing and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" "I believe that is. I'm quite certain we're going to have a baby. In late spring, I think." Quincy stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the most unguarded, joyful smile Rebecca had ever seen from him. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "We're having a baby." Rebecca nodded, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Yes." In 2 strides, Quincy was kneeling before her chair, gathering her hands in his. "Rebecca, he swallowed hard. "I know our marriage began as an arrangement, practical for both of us, but I want you to know I love you. Have for weeks now, been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon." Rebecca's heart soared at his declaration. "Oh, Quincy, I love you too, so much." He reached up to cup her face tenderly. "A baby," he said again, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." His hand moved to rest gently on her stomach, and Rebecca covered it with her own. In that moment, the mail-order bride who had arrived in tears and the cowboy who had told her she didn't need to pretend were truly husband and wife, bound not by convenience but by genuine love and the promise of the family they were creating together. Winter descended on the Kansas prairie with icy determination. Snow blanketed the land, transforming the rolling grasslands into a vast white expanse that glittered beneath the cold winter sun. Inside the Hayes ranch house, life continued with its own rhythm. The wood stove burned constantly, keeping the bitter cold at bay while Rebecca's belly grew rounder with each passing week. December brought Christmas celebrations, first at the church in Hayes City, then a quieter observance at home with Pedro and Magdalena. Quincy surprised Rebecca with a rocking chair he had secretly ordered from the furniture maker in Salina. "For when the baby comes," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth oak. "Thought you might want a comfortable place to sit while you're nursing." Rebecca blinked back tears, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, Quincy. Thank you." Her gift to him was more modest, a hand-knitted scarf in soft blue yarn that matched his eyes, and a book of Walt Whitman's poetry she had ordered through the general store. "Thought we could read it together in the evenings," she said, as he examined the volume with interest. That winter established a pattern that would serve them well in years to come. During the day, they attended to their respective duties, Quincy seeing to the livestock with Pedro, Rebecca managing the household with Magdalena's help. But the evenings were theirs alone, spent before the fire with Quincy reading aloud from Whitman while Rebecca worked on tiny garments for the baby. "I celebrate myself and sing myself," Quincy read, his deep voice giving weight to the poet's words. "And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." Rebecca's needle paused in its work. It's beautiful, isn't it? The idea that we're all connected, all part of the same grand universe. Quincy looked up from the book. Never thought of poetry that way before. Always seemed like fancy words that didn't say much. He smiled. You're teaching me to see things differently, Rebecca. We're teaching each other, she replied, placing a hand on her growing belly as the baby kicked. And soon we'll have another student. January brought a bitter cold snap that kept them housebound for nearly a week. The temperature dropped so low that even brief exposure to the air outside burned the lungs. Quincy and Pedro took turns making the necessary trips to the barn to care for the livestock, their faces wrapped in scarves, returning with frost in their beards and eyebrows. "Worst winter I can remember," Pedro declared as he stamped snow from his boots by the kitchen door. "Even the wolves are coming closer to the ranch. Heard them last night not far from the cattle shed." Quincy's face grew serious. "We'll need to keep watch. Can't afford to lose any stock this year." Rebecca understood his concern. With a baby on the way, their resources would be stretched thinner. Every calf that survived the winter represented income they would need in the coming year. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the eaves, Rebecca voiced a concern that had been growing in her mind. "Quincy, what if the baby comes early, or if there are complications? We're so far from town and in weather like this." Quincy drew her closer against his side. "I've thought of that too. Talked to Doc Wilson last time we were in town. When you're closer to your time, he suggested you might stay with the Wilsons for a week or two just to be safe." Relief washed over Rebecca. "That would ease my mind considerably." "And mine," Quincy admitted, his hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "Nothing's more important to me than you and this little one being safe." February brought a thaw, temporary but welcome, allowing easier travel to town. Rebecca's teaching schedule had been reduced to one morning a week as her pregnancy advanced, but she treasured those few hours with her students. "Mrs. Hayes, are you going to name your baby after one of us?" 6-year-old Sarah Jenkins asked one Wednesday morning as Rebecca helped her form her letters. Rebecca smiled. "I don't know yet. Quincy and I haven't decided on names." "If it's a boy, you should name him after my pa," offered young Thomas Cooper. "He's the sheriff, you know. Best shot in the county." "I'll keep that in mind," Rebecca promised solemnly. Later that day, as Quincy drove them home, Rebecca shared the children's suggestions. "We should probably start thinking of names," she said. "The baby will be here in less than 3 months." Quincy nodded thoughtfully. "Been thinking on it some. If it's a girl, maybe we could name her after your mother. You've spoken of her so fondly." Rebecca's heart swelled with love for this man who continually surprised her with his consideration. "Eleanor," she said softly. Her name was Eleanor. "Eleanor Hayes has a nice sound to it." "It does," Quincy agreed. "And if it's a boy," Rebecca hesitated, then suggested, "what about James?" "After your father." Now it was Quincy's turn to look touched. "You do that, of course. Family is important, Quincy, even those who are gone." He reached across the wagon seat to squeeze her hand. "Eleanor or James Hayes, our child will have a good name either way." March roared in like the proverbial lion, bringing with it renewed storms and the first stirrings of spring beneath the snow. Rebecca's time grew closer, and as agreed, Quincy took her to stay with the Wilsons in Hayes City. "It's only for a few weeks," she reminded him as he carried her trunk upstairs to the guest room. "You'll visit every few days, and before you know it, we'll be coming home, all 3 of us." The separation was difficult for both of them, accustomed as they had become to sharing their days and nights. Rebecca missed the ranch, the routines they had established, the quiet evenings by the fire. but she acknowledged the wisdom of being close to Dr. Wilson as her confinement approached. Martha proved a godsend during this time, sharing her own experiences of childbirth and motherhood, helping Rebecca prepare mentally and emotionally for what was to come. "Were you frightened?" Rebecca asked one afternoon as they worked on the baby's layette together. When your time came with your first, Martha considered the question seriously. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also ready in a strange way. Your body knows what to do, Rebecca, trust it." The advice echoed what Magdalena had told her months earlier, and Rebecca found comfort in the shared wisdom of women who had walked this path before her. Quincy rode into town every 3 days, weather permitting, bringing news of the ranch and taking back Rebecca's reassurances to Magdalena. On each visit, he seemed more anxious than the last, his eyes constantly assessing Rebecca's condition. "You'll be the first to know when it starts," she promised during one such visit in early April. "Martha has already arranged for someone to fetch you." "Pedro's keeping a horse saddled day and night," Quincy said. "I can be here in 45 minutes if I push hard." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Everything will be fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Quincy replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Not my wife." The labor began on a clear April morning, just as dawn was breaking over Hayes City. Rebecca woke to a sharp pain that wrapped around her lower back and stole her breath. By the time Martha looked in on her an hour later, there was no doubt the baby was coming. Dr. Wilson sent his young assistant racing for the Hayes ranch while he prepared his equipment. Martha bustled about boiling water, laying out clean linens and offering Rebecca encouragement as the pains intensified. "Breathe through it, dear," she advised. "That's right. Each pain brings the baby closer." The hours blurred together for Rebecca, marked only by the rhythm of contractions that grew stronger and closer together. She lost track of time, focused solely on the work her body was doing. When Quincy's voice suddenly broke through the haze of pain, she nearly wept with relief. "I'm here, Rebecca," he said, taking her hand. His face was pale with worry, his hair disheveled from the hard ride. "You made it," she gasped between contractions. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. Dr. Wilson shooed Quincy from the room shortly thereafter, as was customary, sending him to wait downstairs with George. The separation was brief, however. Shortly after noon, the strong, angry cry of a newborn filled the Wilson home. "A boy," Martha announced jubilantly. A healthy baby boy. When Quincy was allowed back into the room, Rebecca was propped up against the pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, her eyes shining with a joy Quincy had never seen before. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. "James Quincy Hayes." Quincy approached the bed with reverence, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peeking from the blankets. James had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. "He's perfect," Quincy whispered, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. "You both are." As Quincy tentatively touched his son's tiny hand, the baby's fingers instinctively curled around his father's thumb. The simple reflex action brought tears to Quincy's eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "For him, for coming to Kansas, for everything." Rebecca smiled through her own tears. "Thank you for meeting me at that train station, for telling me I didn't have to pretend, for giving me a real home and real love." They remained at the Wilsons for another week, allowing Rebecca to regain her strength before the journey home. The news of James's birth spread quickly through Hayes City, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and good wishes. First baby born to a mail-order bride in these parts, George Wilson remarked with a twinkle in his eye. "People are curious." Rebecca found she didn't mind the attention. The genuine warmth of the community's response confirmed what she had come to believe, that Hayes City and the surrounding area was home now, in a way Philadelphia had ceased to be long before she left. On a mild April morning, Quincy carefully helped Rebecca and baby James into the wagon for the journey home. Martha tearfully pressed a basket of food into their hands, along with a knitted blanket for the baby. "You'll bring him to visit often," she insisted. "I intend to spoil my honorary grandson shamelessly." "We will," Rebecca promised, embracing the woman who had become like a mother to her. The ride to the ranch was taken at a gentle pace, Quincy constantly checking that Rebecca and James were comfortable. As they approached the final rise before the ranch came into view, Quincy halted the team. "Welcome home," he said as the house appeared below them, fresh white paint gleaming in the spring sunshine. A banner hung from the porch railing Magdalena's handiwork, no doubt proclaiming "Welcome, baby Hayes." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes at the sight. "Home," she echoed. "It truly is, isn't it?" Quincy's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Has been since the day you arrived." Pedro and Magdalena were waiting in the yard, their faces alight with excitement as the wagon pulled up to the house. Magdalena could barely contain herself, practically dancing with impatience to see the baby. "Oh, he is beautiful," she exclaimed when Rebecca carefully placed James in her arms. "Look, Pedro, he has Quincy's chin, yes, and Rebecca's nose, I think." "He's perfect," Pedro agreed, looking somewhat nervous at the tiny bundle but clearly pleased. Inside, Rebecca discovered that the house had been transformed in her absence. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, the floors gleamed with polish, and a cradle handmade by Pedro waited beside their bed upstairs. "Magdalena has been busy," Quincy observed with a smile. "We wanted everything ready," Magdalena explained. "A new mother should rest, not worry about housework." That night, after James had been fed and settled in his cradle, Rebecca and Quincy lay in their bed, listening to the soft sounds of their son's breathing. Outside, spring peepers called from the creek, and a gentle rain began to patter against the roof. "Happy?" Quincy asked, drawing Rebecca against his side. "Completely," she answered without hesitation. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her temple. "Remember that day at the train station? You were crying, and I told you that you didn't have to pretend with me." Rebecca nodded. "I'll never forget it. I meant it then, and I mean it now. No pretending between us, Rebecca, only truth." "Only truth," she agreed. "And the truth is, I love you, Quincy Hayes, with all my heart. And I love you, Rebecca Hayes. You and our son, you're everything to me." As they drifted towards sleep, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a tearful arrival in a strange town to lying in the arms of a man she loved completely, their child sleeping peacefully nearby. What had begun as an arrangement born of mutual need had blossomed into something beautiful and real. Life on the Kansas prairie would never be easy. There would be hard winters and dry summers, financial worries and physical hardships. But there would also be joy and laughter, love and partnership. There would be James growing strong in the clean prairie air, and perhaps other children to follow. There would be a community that had embraced them, friends who had become family. And there would be Quincy Steady, kind, honorable Quincy, who had looked past her tears that first day to see the woman beneath, who had offered her the precious gift of being herself without pretense or performance. As Rebecca slipped into sleep, her last conscious thought was of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her west, for the man who had met her at the station, and for the life they were building together on this wild, beautiful frontier. The years would prove her right. James would be joined by a sister, Eleanor, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, Samuel. The Hayes ranch would prosper, weathering economic downturns and natural disasters through Quincy's perseverance and Rebecca's resourcefulness. Rebecca would eventually take over as the primary teacher at the Hayes City School when Emily Thompson married and moved to Topeka. The mail-order bride from Philadelphia would become a respected fixture in the community, known for her kindness, intelligence, and unwavering support of her husband. And throughout it all, the promise made that first day would remain their cornerstone. No pretending, only truth, only love.